Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the 7.16 ADC tier list. So this is the first time that I've done an ADC tier list. I'm going to try to do more tier lists for each role on every patch. I've always done the support ones for the last year or so, but I'm going to start doing the ADC tier list as well. So we're going to start off just talking about the ADC meta a little bit, key considerations. Then we're going to go down the tier list here. And for like the first couple of minutes before that, I'm just going to rehash the patch notes. If you didn't watch that video, I've got a link to it right here. Be sure to watch it if you want to know my specific thoughts on the patch notes and just sort of where the meta is overall for every role. You can look through that, and then it also has the support tier list on it if you're interested in that. But I'm not going to talk about all that for very long, just a few minutes, just a rehash in case you haven't watched it. And then we'll get into the ADC specifically really quickly. If you want to watch or if you want to view this document, just look in the description. You'll see a link to the Google Doc. You can follow along. If you don't have time to watch the whole thing, you can just read the parts that you find most interesting and then just skip to those parts in the video. I'll also have timestamps in the description to help you navigate as well. Okay, so let's talk about the overall meta here really quickly. And just a fast disclaimer as well. I play support like 90% of my games. I'm a support specialist, but I do play with AD carries quite a lot, and I do think critically about which AD carries are strong and which kinds of supports work with those AD carries. So although I don't play AD carries specifically a lot, I think I have a pretty good feel for the meta. Okay, so the patch notes themselves, one of the notable differences for ADC specifically was Caitlyn. She's still going to be very strong and competitive, but she's not as strong at Platinum and lower, I think, because people just don't use her combos correctly. And it doesn't seem like it's very hard to use the combos, but for some reason, at least when I'm watching, it almost never happens. Which is to say, if someone steps on a trap, you headshot them, net backwards, trigger another headshot. As you're flying backwards, you hit them with a Q, headshot them, boom. You know, it should be like 75% of their health. Almost nobody does that. The vast majority of Caitlyn's will simply just headshot somebody, and that's it if they step on a trap. And that's just not good enough. Because as Caitlyn, you're giving up a lot of attack speed scaling, because they nerfed her either last patch or the patch before in terms of attack speed. And you're just not going to have as much utility if you're really not leveraging those traps as someone like a Kalista or a Tristana or a Draven or any number of other top-end AD carries. So she is still pretty good if you have good trap usage, if you know how to do full combos with her, if you really leverage her sieging potential and push safely, get vision, and take towers down quickly. I just think that Tristana, after all the Caitlyn nerfs and after the direct and indirect Tristana buffs throughout the season, I think that she's just the premier sieger right now. So you'll still see Caitlyn in solo queue because that range, that's another thing, her range is very high early on in the game at 650, but you have to actually use that for it to matter. Like, you have to land auto attacks on the enemy a lot for it to matter in lane, because that's one of her big strengths is her early game. And so if you're just sitting there just auto attacking the wave and not really auto attacking champions and taking full advantage of her range, then you're really wasting a huge part of her kit. And a lot of people do that. I see so many people just sit there and farm with Caitlyn. They'll just last hit minions, and that's really wasting a lot of her early game potential. So she can be very strong if you combo correctly, if you use traps correctly, if you really leverage her range to gain an advantage early on. But these are all deceptively advanced things that people just don't do a lot of times in Platinum and lower. They'll just sit there and farm with her, and they'll just get outscaled because of that, because they're not putting people behind early. Like, you really have to put Twitch behind, you have to put Tristana behind, you have to be ahead of the curve with Caitlyn, because she's just not going to scale quite as hard as some of these other champions, especially in the mid game. Her power spike comes a little bit later. Okay, so she got nerfed, less AD on her traps with the scaling, less wave clear on her Q, so she took a couple of hits. She's still relatively strong, but she's just not as strong as she was. Ornn, I've got a whole video about him as support if you're interested in watching that. I think he'll be a mediocre top lane, mediocre jungle. He has mana and itemization problems, but as support, I think he could potentially be quite strong. Fiora doesn't matter that much. I still think tanks are going to be very popular. She'll be a little bit better, but especially at Platinum and lower, she's very hard to play, and so I don't think it's going to severely warp the meta. So, for example, I don't think that tanks are going to all of a sudden like shift out of the meta because Fiora got a little bit stronger here. So it shouldn't matter too much for AD carries. Kane's still all right. I mean, I have seen Red Kayn do all right in games. It's not really going to change the way that you play as AD carry that much, though. He's just a pesky jungler that can get through walls and get to you sometimes. Malachi, this is going to hurt his damage output, but as an AD carry, it shouldn't concern you that much, or you shouldn't jump for joy that much. He's still going to be super tanky. It will slow down his wave clear, so he may not gank you as often early on. So if you're a scaling AD carry, this does actually help you out a little bit. If you're a Tristana, Kalista, Twitch, this will help you because it's going to take him longer to come down and gank bottom, most likely, because his E is a pretty big part of his jungle pathing and wave clear, for lack of a better word, camp clear, I guess. So not a huge deal, but it will save you a little bit in the early game from getting ganked by Malachi as much, I believe. But not a huge deal. It's not going to change the meta. The champions that are strong are still going to be strong. Sion, not going to matter. Vi, pretty good buff. I don't think people are going to start playing her that much more, though, so that's good news because she can just get on the back line if your support it doesn't pick a support that can peel or if they're just not paying attention. So that's good for you because automatic engage is almost always a bad deal for AD carries. I don't think the mid lane stuff's going to matter that much. The mages will still be pretty good. Echo might become a little bit more popular. Fizz might become a little bit more popular. But it shouldn't impact the AD carry too much, I don't believe. So go ahead and skip through that stuff. Cinderholt got a slap on the wrist. Doesn't matter. Coin is still gonna be really strong. It does hurt things like Sona and Nami a little bit because they like the extra mana to spam. But as far as like Janna and Rakan, I think they're still gonna be great. And this is very good news for AD carries because those are really popular Ardent Sensor supports, and that makes AD carry overall a much more powerful role. When you get the extra 25 on hit healing, that means you don't have to rush lifesteal as much, which means you can focus on your Energizer build and not give up your lifesteal in team fights as much as you might otherwise, and having the extra 25% attack speed synergizes very well with your critical strike as well. So very, very good news. It keeps AD carries very powerful with the Ardent Sensor. Okay. Meta predictions, Enchanters still going to be very strong. Tank supports are okay. This just helps you scale up a lot more into a later game because a lot of the supports are not going to engage early, so champions that just want to farm and scale are going to be really strong. AP supports are still relatively weak. This is good for AD carries, particularly AD carries that want to scale. So once again, if you're not getting blown up by Zyra, if you're not getting pushed out by Karma early in the game because of Energizer build, Doran Shield, and the fact that you're going to have an Enchanter on your team probably, this is all good news for AD carries. So this is a very, very strong AD carry meta right now. Tanks are still going to be good. This is bad for AD carries. So you're still going to have Cho'Gath and Maokai running at you, so you're going to have to try to deal with that and just hope that your support's going to peel for you. I think that's going to empower champions that can deal with righteous tanks. We'll talk about that here in a second, but it's going to make very safe AD carries that also scale really popular. So for example, Sivir and Tristana and Kalista are all going to be very strong on this patch because all of them have pretty good kiting potential, pretty good peeling, or self-peeling, I should say, and they all scale very well into the late game. So that's kind of the combo that you're looking for here. Okay, lethality champions are not going to be that strong on this patch. It got nerfed. It still has problems. So you probably shouldn't see too many like full lethality Jarvan, Wukong, Zed. This is all good news. AD carries obviously do not like to go against those champions. It's very difficult to itemize or to stop them when they get really far ahead. So I think that the tanks will keep them in check. So that's good. So tanks running at you with Righteous Glory, that's bad. But the fact that those same tanks crush things like Talon and Zed, that's good. So it's kind of a wash for AD carries, I think. It's, you know, trading one evil for another in some sense. But I would probably bet most people would probably rather spend time trying to hack through a Maokai or a Cho'Gath and actually be able to stay at a safe distance rather than a Zed just pressing R on you and killing you when he's got 8 kills. Okay, I mean, he can still do that to some extent. It's just going to be a little bit harder because the Maokais and the Cho'Gaths are going to crush him in the mid game if he doesn't get really far ahead. Okay, yep, super strong scaling AD carries. Like I just mentioned, Sivir, Vayne's pretty good, Kalista, those are all going to be a bit stronger. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into AD carry. So more of the same. as it has been for the last few patches. So the ADC meta TLDR, if you haven't been watching my patch notes or you just kind of want to know what's going on, Bork is relatively weak right now and Hurricane is relatively weak most of the time. There are some notable exceptions, or exception singular, and that is Kalista because of the way that she scales. We'll talk about her when we get to her here in just a second. That she's really the only tier 1 or tier 2 champion that I would recommend getting Bork on. Because of the way that she itemizes. The problem with Bork, and people get confused about this because I have people ask me on stream, well, isn't Bork good against tanks? Isn't it good against tanks? Sort of. It's based on current health, so it's not as good as you would think. It's not based on maximum health. So it's okay on tanks, but the problem is it doesn't scale with anything. And I've got a link to a scaling video here if you want to watch it that I made a couple of months ago. Some of the itemization is slightly different, but the concepts are the same. So if we click on this and look at scaling, Critical Strike is the #1 scaling stat on AD carries, especially with Infinity Edge, because Infinity Edge adds a 5th multiplier to that because it's 50% more damage on critical strikes. So what this means is it's basically a 25% overall DPS increase, because typically a critical strike will give you 100% extra damage on your auto attack where you crit. So 1% crit is basically equal to 1% damage. If you have a 50% chance to crit, you're going to be doing 100 damage 50% more of the time if you had 100 AD. And so that's 50 overall damage. 50% of 100 is 50. So think of critical strike as 1% overall damage increase. Now it's random and that can be frustrating, but that's how it should average out over time. So if you increase critical strike bonus damage by 50%, then you're basically increasing your, since the 100% critical strike is equal to 1%, if you increase that by 50%, you're getting 1.5%. So basically it ends up being an extra 25% damage increase because of this. And I've got the math. Just watch the video if you want to see me math it all out. 50% critical strike equals 25% total damage. 50% critical strike increase equals 25% overall damage increase. So just watch the video if you want to know how that works. But basically, that's the highest scaling AD carry item in the game, and it always has been. People just started buying it now because they reduced the cost of it by a few patches ago, which is pretty strong. And more specifically, they changed the way that Energizer works. So if you look at this thing here, Shiv Lightning, your next basic attack, so Energized Strike. Moving and attacking generates energy stacks up to 100. When fully energized, your next basic attack gains Lightning. And this Lightning goes on here, and it can critically strike, and scales with critical strike damage. So Infinity Edge also increases not only your chance to get a static Shiv critical strike, but also the amount of damage that it does. It's going to do 50% more damage on that critical strike. So it's a lot of extra damage. And then you have Rapid Fire Cannon, which Energized Strike, as you move around, moving and attacking generates energized stacks up to 100. When fully energized, your next basic attack gains Fire Cannon, which gives you extra damage. Fire Cannon is applicable on structures. Attacks become energized 25% faster, and that's key, because this works with, you can have both items, which is strange because it is named Energized Strike, and typically you can't have them both at the same time or they cancel each other out. If you think of something like Trinity Force Spellblade, that's how that works. But for some reason, with Rapid Fire Cannon, then you can have, because it's called Fire Cannon is the ability rather than Shiv Lightning. So it's kind of confusing, but basically the Energize works with this. The 25% extra here means you're going to get 25% more of these static Shiv procs, and you're going to get this bonus damage 25% higher on hit, which gives you extra range. And Warlord's Bloodlust is also an energized attack, so you're going to get the Bloodlust proc 25% faster. And look, if it critical strikes, it does a bunch of extra healing and gives you extra movement speed. So that's really the combo for AD carries, is you go static Shiv, Bloodthirster as your mastery, and then Rapid Fire Cannon, and you have Infinity Edge because that increases your critical strikes. So all of these work very, very well with each other because they all give you plus critical strikes. You get 30, 30, and then 20 off of Infinity Edge. And that's 80% chance to critical strike. Gives you a ton of extra attack speed on top of that, and it gives you the triple Energizer. So that's what people call the Energizer build, and that's the highest scaling damage build in the game. So they've changed that over time. They lowered the cost on most critical strike items, and they changed the way that Energizer works. They changed the way that Warlord's Bloodlust works over the last 5 patches or so. So that's why critical strike has become much, much better than Blade of the Ruined King. The problem with Blade of the Ruined King is it doesn't scale with anything. So yeah, it scales with like the maximum health of the enemy, but it's awful with critical strike, and that's really what the best stat in the game is right now. And it, like I said, it always has been, even before the Energizer changes. It's just a question of, are you willing to give up utility for the critical strikes? And right now you aren't giving up utility because you're getting utility. You're getting healing. You're getting extra range. You're getting movement speed increases. You're getting this area of effect, which helps you wave clear more. So you're getting all of the best utility that's available at AD carry, and you're getting the highest damage output, and that's why critical strike is important. Before, critical strike was the highest damage, but it took more gold to get to it, and you gave up everything else that you wanted, basically. And so you would want more utility, so you would go for, you know, if you think maybe 7 patches ago, you would go for Blade of the Ruined King, and you would go for Hurricane. But they nerfed both of those items specifically, and the game has slowed down quite a lot between Doran Shield and Enchanter supports, and just lowering the damage across the board that they did about 7.5, 7.6 a while ago. So that means there's more time to get more items, right? So Blade of the Ruined King plus Hurricane was very strong in a meta where you would only get 2 items. A lot of the time you get Blade of the Ruined King and Hurricane. And sometimes on some champions like Lucian, you might get Black Cleaver, which was also nerfed. And I guess you would sometimes get Phantom Dancer. That wasn't nerfed, but they nerfed Black Cleaver, they nerfed Blade of the Ruined King, and they nerfed Hurricane. And they introduced all the Energizer stuff, and they buffed Critical Strike. So those are the 4 things that have kind of changed the meta around. And you still see some people rush Blade of the Ruined King because they think it's good against tanks, but it's not. It's 8% of current health. It can't Critical Strike. It doesn't give you Energizer procs. This doesn't scale. It's just 100 flat magic damage. This is something that they changed also about this item. So it's just not nearly as good as it once was. It's probably still one of the best single item power spikes because it gives you attack damage, attack speed, and it gives you this nice proc, and it gives you the lifesteal and the extra movement speed. So it does have a lot of utility as a single item. So if you can really leverage it and get a ton of kills, you know, like right when you complete this around, you know, level 8 or 9, sure, it can be good. But the problem is the games are extending, and it just, once you get 3 items, Infinity Edge plus Rapid Fire Cannon plus Static Shiv, you just can't keep up with Blade of the Ruined King plus Hurricane plus X other item. It's just not going to be nearly as strong, even in sustained fights most of the time. So this seems like it would be good because it gives you the on-hit, lifesteal, all of that in a sustained fight. But Rapid Fire, you just get more Energizer, more all of that stuff I just mentioned. So that's why the Rapid Fire Cannon is the best build for the vast majority of AD carries. So, you know, sometimes people will get Essence Reaver if they need the extra CDR or if they need the extra mana. But, I mean, you can go Essence Reaver plus and then Static Shiv, Rapid Fire, but you're giving up a lot of damage. If we look at Essence Reaver, so sometimes you'll see like Sivir do this, or maybe Ashe will do this. You are giving up 10 8. Well, I guess it's the same AD. You're getting the same critical strike, and you're getting cooldown reduction. But you're not getting that 50% multiplier, which is massive. As you get more AD, remember, it's basically an extra 25% AD damage. And remember that that also scales with Warlord's Bloodlust in terms of how much you're going to heal. And it scales with how much damage you're going to do off your Static Shiv procs. So basically, if you have an ultimate that's very powerful, like a Sivir ult, you can consider getting Essence Reaver. And she does need the mana as well, but the vast majority of AD carries should probably not get this item. Now, I have seen some people on like Draven who go like Infinity Edge plus Essence Reaver. I mean, this is actually not a terrible, maybe 4th item after you complete your, Rapid Fire Cannon, Static Shiv, Infinity Edge, because that will give you the full 100% critical strike. It'll give you 30% total CDR, and it gives you 70 attack damage, and it restores mana. So it might be okay as a 4th item, potentially, if you don't need to get Mortal Reminder, if you don't need to get Quicksilver Sash, so if you're against a bunch of squishies or something, but it should be a pretty rare buy. It should be pretty rare, honestly. Okay. So we've got that out of the way. Lethality is similarly pretty weak right now, and the reason is Lethality doesn't scale very well against tanks. So it's flat armor penetration, and that's great if your target only has like 40 armor or 50 armor maybe, but it's not going to do a lot against like a Cho'Gath or a Maokai that has like 200 armor. They're still going to block a ton of damage. Once again, this doesn't crit. It doesn't work with Energizer, so it's not going to scale nearly as well. Like, once you lower armor, you're dealing a higher percentage of damage the lower and lower it gets. So they kind of scale with each other, but they have much lower attack damage, and these don't have any sort of attack speed on them. So if you look at the suite of lethality items that people will get, you've got this as the CDR. It has this. Now, Night Stalker is powerful. They did nerf it. This item was extremely powerful on like 7.14, I think, or 7.15. I can't remember. I think it was 7.14. It was extremely powerful, and I talked about it in my patch notes video, but they very, very quickly nerfed it. They took away the ranged hit. So there was like a hot moment there where like Miss Fortune and Jhin for like 2 weeks were super powerful, but people didn't even figure it out until after it was already done, unless you watched my videos. But they've nerfed it since then. So it has attack damage, cooldown reduction, lethality, but no attack speed. Attack speed is very, very important for proccing Warlords. The faster you attack, the more Warlords procs you're going to get. It's important for proccing crits. It's just important overall for doing things. As an AD carry, most of the time you need attack speed on most champions, except for Jhin, once again. So that's why Jhin should still build lethality and not... I mean, I guess you can build Energizer on Jhin. It's okay. I have seen it. It can work, but... someone like Jhin or Miss Fortune can still build lethality because they don't rely on attack speed. Miss Fortune's basically an ult bot later on in the game, and Jhin doesn't get any extra attack speed. His attack speed gets converted to AD, but it's not as good as having flat attack speed itself. So that's the problem with these items, is they don't have any attack speed on them, and they don't have any critical strike. All they do is they lower armor. So they are good on burst damage champions like Kha'Zix, like Rengar, like Zed, who don't really care about attack speed. They just want maximum damage. And they are early to mid-game power spike units. They want to snowball hard. They need to snowball. And they are champions who want to get Duskblade and Youmuu's. But tanks crush them because they're going to survive the burst. And then after Zed does his full combo to Maokai and takes off like 10% of his health, he's just not going to do anything after that. So, I think that lethality AD carries are mostly out. Like, Jhin and Miss Fortune sort of kind of are okay, but they're mostly gone. Varus, lethality is out. So, yeah, that's what's up with lethality. It just doesn't scale nearly as hard. It was good. It got nerfed. I think it lost 10 AD on Duskblade, which is a pretty big deal. And they nerfed kind of the base damage here. Okay, let me pull this back over here so I can keep track of it. Okay, so Energizer's the way to be. Bork, Hurricane is weak on everybody except for Kalista. Lethality is pretty weak. Energizer's ideal. And late game scaling AD carries are really good because you get all these Warlord procs, which I just talked about, which means you get free lifesteal throughout the whole game. It ramps up as the game goes on. It means you don't have to buy a lifesteal item. So in the past, it could be really hard to make it through lane if you didn't get a Vamp Scepter, for example. And you'd build that Vamp Scepter into a Blade of the Ruined King, so you could survive tough lanes early on, or you would build it into, maybe a few years ago, you'd build it into a Bloodthirster. Now you might even consider building it into something like a Death's Dance. but or an early Mercurial Scimitar, something like that. But you don't need that anymore because Warlords is going to heal you through lane a lot of the time. You just basically get a bunch of free lifesteal in addition to free movement speed. And also you have Doran's Shield, which is still extremely overpowered. If you haven't used this item before against a tough lane, let's say you're against a Sona or a Nami or a Xayah or something like that, try it out. The item is ridiculous. And I talked about it as soon as it got released. I was like, ridiculous. You're going to see a lot of AD carries start using this. And they did. So they nerfed it so you get one less potion. It costs 450 instead of 400 to get Doran's Shield, but it still is extremely strong. So if you're against someone who wants to bully you out early, like Caitlyn, this is another reason that Caitlyn's a bit weaker, because it's hard to bully someone through Warlord's Dorans to start with. You know, if you're against a Caitlyn or a Sona or a Nami or a Lulu or a Karma or whatever, this is why Karma has also disappeared from the meta largely, because she doesn't scale nearly as well as a lot of other supports, and her early game harassment just doesn't matter anymore because of Doran's Shield Warlord. Then that means that late game ADCs are going to be strong because you just can't punish them early. You just cannot crack through Warlords, Dorans, and the Enchanter they're going to have, whether it's Janna or Sona or Nami or anybody, maybe even Lulu. So that's just three things that make it really, really hard to pressure someone out of lane early. You either have to all in and kill them with like a Leona Draven or maybe a Xayah Draven or something like that, or you're just going to sit there and farm it out with them most of the time. And if you're just going to farm it out, you need to pick a champion that scales the best with IE Static Shiv Rapid Fire. Does the champion use that well? That's basically it. The champions that use this the best are going to be the strongest. So things that inherently have extra attack speed into their kit, or things that scale, like have extra bonuses with critical strike, or add a whole bunch of extra AD to their kit. These are all things that are going to be the best in this meta right now. We'll talk about which champions do that here in just a second. I don't want this video to be too long, but it probably will be. Yeah, it's probably going to be an hour. I really wanted to aim for 30 minutes, but that's just impossible on this channel with the kind of explanation and depth that I give. Okay, so that's kind of the questions you want to be asking yourself. Okay, so overall, key considerations. What makes a strong ADC on 7.16? You need to answer these questions. The more of these questions you can say yes to, the stronger the AD carry is going to be. So does it scale very well with crit? Is it good with rapid fire? So in other words, does it have things in its kit that help it get more damage out of critical strikes? Does it have extra attack speed? Does it have just extra things that are going to be good with the kind of stuff that Infinity Edge, Static Shiv, and Rapid Fire bring to the table? Is Ardent Censer good with this champion? Ardent Censer is one of the best, in fact, it is hands down the best support item in the game right now by quite a large margin. And if the champion can use Ardent Censer well, then it's going to be good. So once again, this brings into the question, does it use attack speed very well? Does it use the extra 20 to 35 on hit healing damage very well? So is it landing a lot of hits? All right. So once again, it's just going to reinforce things that are good with the Energizer build. They're going to be good with Ardent Censer. So that's most champions on this list. Just some of the champions kind of lower on the list, like Jhin, Misfortune, Ashe, things like that aren't going to use critical strike nearly as well as some of the higher champions. And so Ardent Censer is a big reason why. It just makes the rich richer. Champions that are already good with the Energizer build are going to be even better with the Ardent Censer Energizer build, because it's going to give them more attack speed. More attack speed is more crits, more energizing, all of that good stuff. So, and those champions also typically, like Janna, like Sona, like Nami, who are all good with Ardent Censer, those champions typically have really good sort of shielding, healing, peeling, which is great with late game AD carries. So it helps you out in lane, and they help you transition into later in the game. Okay, can the champion handle righteous tanks? So this is something that's really important to ask yourself too. Really, the introduction or the revamping of Righteous Glory, I'll go ahead and pull it up real quick. This is my first one of these videos, so I just want to... This stuff's been around for a couple of patches, but if you haven't thought critically about this, I've talked about it at various times on my channel. I've talked about it on past patch notes, but I'll just go into this really quickly. So they changed this in 7.12. It didn't really matter that much on that patch because tanks still weren't very strong, but once they did some changes to Cho'Gath, Maokai, and really it was the introduction of the new Thornmail. I think that was 7.14. introduction of Thornmail and buffing of various other tank items, combined with Righteous Glory, as what has brought this tank meta into the fold over the last few patches. So this change is something that a lot of people overlooked, including myself, because it didn't matter when it was released, but it mattered 2 patches later. So they reduced the health cost by 100, which is 266 gold. Each point of health is 2.66 gold. But they gave it 30 armor, which is 20 gold each. So that's 600 armor that they gave it, 600 gold worth of armor. And they gave it 10% attack speed, which is about 350 gold worth of stats. I think. How did they calculate it? 266. I think it's closer to 350 the way I do my calculations on CDR, but CDR is kind of a tricky stat to calculate because typically you can't get just a CDR item. It always comes with other stats on it. So anyways, even at 266, you're getting 866 gold worth of new stats. And you're only losing 266. So you're getting an extra 600 gold worth of efficiency. And all that you're losing is this dinky little passive that no one cared about anyways. Like, it gives you back a little bit of mana when you take damage. And yeah, that's just awful. And when you use mana, it gives you back a little bit, up to 25 health per cast. This is just a very obscure ability that just did not matter on the vast majority of champions that wanted to build Righteous Glory. And so getting an extra 600 gold worth of efficiency for trading out this dinky passive, yes, please. Very strong. So that's why this is a lot more powerful than it was before. And so what this means is that champions like Malachi, like Cho'Gath, who historically you've been able to kite pretty well, you can't kite them so well anymore because they just get to run up and get in your face. It's very hard to escape someone who gets an extra 75% movement speed that also slows you down for 75% for 2 seconds once they land. So how do you deal with that? You know, you need to ask yourself this as an AD carry. What do you do when Malachi is running at you with Righteous Glory? What do you do if Cho'Gath's running at you with Righteous Glory? Do you have an answer to that? Or you just roll over and die? Like, your support, if you have a Janna on your team or something like that, can help you out a little bit. But you have to have answers to highly mobile tanks that are going to be running at you. So that's an important question that you need to ask. Does the AD carry have an answer to that? Can they get out of that somehow? Like, Tristana can either jump away or knock people back with her R, so she has 2 answers. Kalista can kite them with her auto attack. Sivir can pop her ult and spell shield to run away from them. So a lot of the top AD carries do have answers for that. Caitlyn can try to use her trap. Xayah can use her ult. So there are a few champions that have better answers than others, but this is the defining question in this meta is, can you handle righteous tanks? Do you work well with righteous tanks? So do you help tanks engage like Sivir? When tanks are on their targets, do you do a lot of damage so that you can kill the enemy tanks before their AD carry kills your tanks? Because it's basically just, a lot of it's tank wars most of the time. You have this front line, they're just sitting there hitting each other with wet noodles, and the AD carry is just free fire on the tanks, and just whoever drops first is going to win. So are you good at breaking tanks? Are you good at helping your tanks get in there to fight? Like Sivir, like Kalista. If you have a tanky support, she can throw somebody in to help start a fight. So how does that work? Fights are lasting longer, so Xayah can stack more feathers on the ground and use or get a ton of burst damage off of her E. So these are all questions to consider when you're thinking about top 80 carries. Can the champion wave clear in Siege? Wave clear is very, very important, right? And this is something that I think at lower elos people don't appreciate, and I'm learning to appreciate it more every day, is that getting waves off of towers is really important. Being able to push waves into towers is very important, because that can be a really big deal. If you can keep the enemy team off your tower for an extra 3 seconds for help to arrive, or if they're spawning and they're running back to defend their tier 2 mid tower, if you can clear that last wave and get an extra 3 seconds on the tower, that's very powerful. That can be the difference between the tower falling or not. Or if you can push mid lane really, really quickly, like let's say that you push mid with a Sivir and you clear a wave in like 2 seconds, and then they get pushed in with a Vayne, and it's going to take that Vayne 10 seconds to clear the wave. Well, that's an extra 8 seconds that you get to go and potentially threaten the Baron, or that you get to go help your support ward, or that you get to go farm the Raptors, or go farm a side lane, or just even back and come back with a stronger item so that you can pressure the tower while Vayne has to sit there with gold in her pocket because she doesn't have wave clear. You get to take towers faster and snowball harder. So wave clear is very, very, very important in League of Legends. And having that in the AD carry slot is crucial, especially for solo queue, because sometimes your team just won't pick wave clear because they won't respect it, right? So you just might get a Fiora top lane and a Kassadin mid lane, and I'm trying to think of something else that's popular that doesn't have a lot of weight, like a Maokai jungle or something. All of these don't have great wave clear. It's okay, but it's not great. And so being able to have wave clear from the AD carry slot is very, very good. So a lot of the top tier AD carries do have pretty good wave clear. And does the champion have utility? Does it have something else like unique and interesting and powerful that contributes to your overall effectiveness of your team? Does it, and sieging towers is obviously very important too. The faster that you take towers, the same kind of reasoning as wave clear. It just helps you snowball the game faster, get more advantages. Does it have utility? So does it have a good team fighting ultimate? Does it have things that buff your team or debuff the other team? Does it have something that gives extra safety to your team in some way? Are there things, does it have a mechanic that gives you a ton of extra gold like Draven? Are there things that your champion has that's unique that helps you win the game that other champions just don't offer very well? Okay, so these are all things that you want to ask yourself as you go down this tier list. Now, I did create a document for Tristana. I'll try to add on for at least the top 2 tier lists, so the top 8 champions here. I'll try to add on these little documents here, so you could click on it. I'm going to go through, I'm going to talk about the strengths of the champion. That just looks better. Overall matchups, so who the champion's good with, who they're good against, who they're bad with, who they're bad against, and then recommended items here. I could talk about runes a little bit, but most of the runes are very similar on a lot of these champions, and frankly, runes matter depending on your ability to last hit. I would say if you're not comfortably able to last hit at least 70 CS by 10 minutes, regardless of your elo. Now that's optimistic for bronze and silver, but you really need to be able to last hit. That's the most important thing as AD carry, because that's free gold, especially in bronze and silver. People will not challenge you. They will just sit there and farm with you a lot of the time. They're not going to contest your last hits until you start getting to, really even in platinum, they don't contest your last hits that much. So they'll do it a little bit. But you need to be able to get to 70 CS by 10 minutes. So you've got 8 minutes to do that. I believe there is 13 CS per minute. So there's 6 that comes down in the main wave, and then you're going to get a cannon wave once a minute. So if there's 13 CS per minute, and CS starts coming down at, I believe it's at 2 minutes. It might be a little bit earlier than that, but we'll just say even if it starts at 2 minutes flat, 13 times 8, that's 104. So there's 104 CS that comes down. If you need to get to 70, I think that means you need to hit 52% of the minions. There's 104. People say if you get 100 CS in 10 minutes, that's really, really good. But a perfect CS score would be 104. And I think that's right. So you need to be able to hit 67% of the CS. That's better. I don't know, I zoned out on the math there. So you need to be able to hit 67% of the CS. So you need to hit 2/3 of the minions that come down the wave. Now you got to keep in mind also that you're going to need a back at some point. You're going to need a ward. There's just going to be CS that you miss. But you need to be able to get to 70 by 10 minutes. So yeah, it's hard, but it can be done. So basically what that comes down to is if you're not hitting 70 per minute, you need AD, a lot of AD. So just don't do what the guides say. Don't get the attack speed. Don't get the lethality runes. Don't get all that stuff. Get flat AD, okay? Get flat AD until you can hit 70 CS per minute. Once you can hit 70, or per 10 minutes, once you can hit 70 CS in 10 minutes, then you can start scaling back your AD a little bit and start running those attack speed runes that people like. Because I know a lot of people popular builds will run less AD, and it'll run like 15% attack speed and 10 AD or something like that. No, you need to go to the full 15 AD until you hit that 70 CS. Because that's the most important thing, is hitting the CS. And if you can't do it early, it's not going to be good. You need that CS. So just, I would say flat AD until you get to that number. And then once you feel comfortable at that number, then start scaling it back. Because you don't think that it means much, but there are so many times where if you're learning how to CS, you'll hit something and it'll have like 5 HP left. And then your minions will kill it. Right? That happens a lot, where it looks like there's just a tiny sliver of health there. But if you have just a little bit more AD, you would have been able to hit it. Now, certain champions are good for this too. Like Draven gets a ton of extra AD. And things like Tristana and Draven and Sivir are very good with BF Sword early on, which helps you last hit. Someone like Kalista is going to want to rush Blade the Ruined King early, and this is another problem with Blade the Ruined King. It doesn't have a lot of AD on it. You're going to be getting attack speed. You're going to be getting like a Vamp Scepter and a recurve bow. So that's going to make it harder for you to last hit because you're not going to have as much AD. So that's another perk of playing something like Sivir, Draven, or Tristana. So you get to start with a BF Sword, and that's going to help you last hit. Especially if you're getting pushed to tower. I don't know exactly what the AD threshold is, but you want to be able to last hit that caster minion after it takes 1 tower shot, right? Because if you have to hit the caster minion twice, it makes it much, much harder to last hit a tower. So having the extra 80 runes and having the extra being able to go for a BF sword early is very powerful. Okay. So yeah, so check out this, and then I'll go through, like I said, I don't go into the runes, I don't go into the masteries. It should be warlords on basically everybody. There are a few fervor users. I guess Kalista would probably be fervor, but most people need to be warlords because of that Energizer build. All right, so let's talk about some of these specific AD carries, and I'm going to spend a decent chunk of time on the top 8 here, and then we'll go faster through the other ones. I don't want this to be too long, like an hour. We'll see if we can do it, finish it up in 20 minutes here. But let's get to it. Okay, so Tristana is number 1. I think she has to be picked banned every game, and there's a couple of reasons for this. Let's go ahead and pull her up. There we go. Trist over here, AD over here. I know it's a lot of tabs and that freaks people out, but I just have to have these open so I can jump around to different items and things like that a lot. Okay, so Tristana has skyrocketed in power, and one of the main reasons is they keep nerfing Caitlyn. Right, so they've nerfed Caitlyn 2 or 3 patches in a row now, and that makes her the premier sieger. Also, enchanters just keep getting more popular and more powerful with the coin buffs, and that helps her out in the early game. Because historically, she hasn't done as well in the early game because she has a hard time last hitting under tower. She has a hard time last hitting in general because of her explosive shot, or whatever it's called, explosive charge. So enemies explode, they do a little bit of extra magic damage when they're slain, and that throws off your rhythm, right? So you just might accidentally lower CS, you can't control it, lower the HP on CS, and then the minions are going to kill it. Your own minions are going to kill their minions. So it just makes it a lot harder to last hit, especially under tower, because the minions are going to be at this really odd HP that's going to throw off that rhythm of 2 tower hits, last hit the minion, and on caster minion, obviously, you auto attack, tower hits it, you auto attack, you get it. It throws off that completely because of these explosive charges. So historically, Tristana has had a hard time CSing early. She doesn't have a lot of ranged threat and poke that she can do early on. She can jump. She has a decent all-in. But she doesn't have much poke. Like, she can throw an explosive charge on somebody and auto attack a couple of times, but it's not nearly as strong early on as some other options. And they just buffed her fairly recently. I think they buffed her Q within the last like 6 patches or so. Stats. Okay, here it is. So it was about 10 patches ago they buffed it, which it wasn't relevant back then because that was in the lethality meta early in Season 7, but that's an extra 40% time on your rapid fire, which is really, really powerful. That's her core ability. So let's look at it really quick. What makes her particularly strong? Well, like I said, they nerfed Caitlyn. Now you have enchanter supports to help you out in the early game. And games are going on longer, and so if you miss a few CS early, then it's not as big of a deal because games are going to be ending at, 35 to 40 minutes instead of 30 to 35 for a lot of people. And so that CS early, you have time to make up for it later in the game with your scaling. All right. So that's out of the way. Her early game is much better than it used to be. She's very safe. This is important in a meta where people aren't going to blow you up instantly, but tanks are going to try to stick to you and just disrupt you so that you can't do your auto attacks that you want to be able to do. So she's able to jump away with a rocket jump. A pretty good distance away too, like 900 distance is quite a lot with a rocket jump. And she can knock people back with Buster Shot that's on a low cooldown. So that knocks people back quite a lot, up to 1,000 at level 16. So she has 2 different escapes that she can use to get away. So that's another thing, is she's very good against tanks because she can knock people back. She also gets very large range. So she starts with 550, which is just kind of like your average run-of-the-mill range. But then by level 11, she's got 620 all of a sudden. She's going to be outranging everybody but Caitlyn at that point. So she gets a ton of range, and she even starts to outrange Caitlyn outright starting at level 16. So she does get a ton of range, which inherently makes her very powerful because she can stay further back. So that's another thing that makes her safer than a lot of other AD carries. She has her W, she has her R, and she just has a lot of range in general. This also helps her sieging towers because she doesn't have to stand nearly as close to the tower to auto attack, which means that it's much less likely that she's going to get caught. So all of this, these 3 things make her very, very safe, okay, with the range. It also, with showdowns with other people, it's highly likely she's going to get the first auto attack, especially if you take into consideration rapid fire cannon plus her extra range. She's going to be hitting people from, like 800 plus range away with huge burst damage from the static shiv, the rapid fire proc with Infinity Edge. Okay, and this is her one of her signature things that makes her scale harder than almost anybody else in the game once she gets going, is the bonus attack speed. She gets 110% extra attack speed. That is massive, massive extra attack speed. So not only is that going to give you more auto attacks to help you trigger, perhaps more critical strikes and just do more damage overall, but remember that the Energizer, I was going to call it Matrix, the Energizer stuff that I was mentioned before, that trio of procs, Warlords, Static Shiv, Rapid Fire, all of that is predicated on getting more energy, which happens when you auto attack. So when you auto attack more, you're going to be triggering more Warlords, which is going to allow you to kite better. It's going to give you more healing. You're going to be triggering more Static Shiv procs, which is a ton of wave clear. It's a ton of damage that can also crit. And it's going to be giving you more rapid fire procs, which gives you the extra range and the extra burst damage. So attack speed is probably the best modifier with rapid fire, or with the Energizer stuff, because it energizes you even faster. So it might even be better than flat AD a lot of the time because it procs Energizer. Having more AD is nice, but it doesn't give you more Energizer procs. And so having that flat attack speed is good. AD is good, but the attack speed in many cases is probably even better. So 110% is higher than almost anybody I can think of in the game in terms of like a single ability. It's just a crazy amount of extra damage. So that's really, really good. And that interacts with on-hit stuff too. So if you have like a Lulu Pix on you or something, for example, then that's going to do a ton of extra damage. And also, it interacts with Janna's shield, which gives you 40 AD for 5 seconds. So since it only lasts for 5 seconds, obviously, the more attacks you get in, the more that AD is going to stack up. So it's 40 extra AD per attack. Whereas if you had flat AD, it doesn't really benefit with Janna's shield that much because it's not going to give you more attacks within that 5-second window. So that means she scales very well with... and that gives you more on hit with Ardent Sensor, because you're going to be getting more of those 25 per damage on hits. So it just scales with everything that's good. It scales with Janna, it scales with Lulu, it scales with Ardent Sensor. It's just a really, really, really powerful ability that's just going to crush everybody in a sustained fight. Okay, so the rocket jump, you get to jump, you get away from things. It's pretty good. Explosive charge is another thing that can be quite powerful. dealing damage to nearby attacks. Tristana's basic attacks and abilities increase the charge by 30%, stacking up to 4 times. So once again, this is based on attack speed. The faster you attack, the faster this charges. So 120% increase, and then once you get that, then it blows up instantly. So it deals an extra 220 plus 242% of your bonus AD. That is a ton of extra damage spike. So this means that it's really hard to duel a Tristana, because once she throws that explosive charge on you and you start fighting, she's all of a sudden going to spike you, you know, for this extra like ton of AD. Now you don't get a lot of bonus AD, you get some, but with the Energizer build, obviously your only bonus AD is going to come from Infinity Edge and your runes. But I mean, that means that Janna's really good once again with her. However, it's still really good. You know, obviously doing a ton of extra damage, and this works on towers, which is important to note. Explosion radius is doubled when you're near a turret, so it doesn't do extra damage, but the explosion radius doubled. So not only does it blow up towers, but it blows up people who are around towers. And it blows up entire minion waves when you blow it up near a wave. So it's wave clear, it's tower destruction, it's dueling power. It just has a ton of utility on that explosive charge. So super, super powerful ability. And then her Buster Shot, of course. Not only can it knock people back, but it's a pretty decent execute too. And it's magic damage. So if they're itemizing all armor, then this does help finish them off. You just want to make sure, obviously, that when you knock people back, if you're trying to kill them, that you don't blow them to safety. This is the one thing you have to watch out for there. So I recommend using this defensively to knock people back, but you can use it offensively. You know, if you have an explosive charge and you're hitting them, and like right when you're going to hit them with that force shot, you just knock them back with that, then it can knock them away from you and then they blow up. So very powerful kit, tons of burst damage, tons of with the explosive charge that also works on minions, works on towers, tons of range to keep you safe, W and ultimate to also keep you safe. Really, really high sustained damage that synergizes with the Energizer build, and a ton of extra stuff with your rapid fire. So there's just almost no weakness to Tristana. And this is why she's must pick, must ban. The only thing is she doesn't do as much early on as someone like a Draven. And she doesn't have as much engage potential as maybe someone like a Kalista, who is paired with a tank support. But it doesn't matter. She's really, really hard to deal with. She's hard to stick on, and you're just not going to outfight her later, and she just pushes and snowballs games so hard because she takes towers so quickly. So she is the #1 AD carry on this patch. Now keep in mind, if you jump in, when the explosive charge blows up, you get a free jump reset. I didn't realize this for quite a while, but that's really powerful if you're trying to all in. You can jump right on somebody to make sure that you finish them off, and then you can jump away. Or in a team fight, for example, if you just put this on a tank and jump away and then hit them 4 times, your thing blows up, they re-engage on you, Malachi tries to W on you again, you can jump away. Obviously the W would follow you in that case, but it just lets you jump around the fight a lot and just keep repositioning. It only costs 60 mana for her jump. So, you know, you can use it offensively to jump in and try to finish people off. You can use it defensively to jump and blow people away. So that's just an extra layer of utility. So she's just overflowing with utility, overflowing with damage. She pairs well with just about anybody. She's just an overpowered champion right now. So very, very, very strong pick ban every game, I think. Sivir's another champion who is climbing in popularity. Now, she's not going to have as much raw power as someone like Draven, or maybe even like a Kalista, but she's very safe, especially early on, and she farms so well, and she has great team utility with her ultimate, especially if you pair her with tanks. So if we look at Sivir here really quickly, I really wish I had some more water. I always start talking and then I forget. I think I can wrap this up quickly and then I forget to grab more water. If we look at old Sivir here, I'm going to wrap this up fairly quickly, I hope. Like I said, I'll spend some time with the top 8 here and then move on from there. So first of all, she has low range, so you need to be careful with that. So, you know, against champions that might harass you early, like Draven is particularly rough for Sivir. that can be a problem. It can also hurt a little bit in team fights with positioning, but she is faster than most other AD carries. She has 335 move speed instead of 325. And whenever she attacks somebody, then she gets bonus movement speed. So that allows her to kite really easily because she's going to be getting, typically at least 35 extra move speed. So that allows her to kite most tanks in a lot of situations and to get away from them. Now it's with an ability or a basic attack. So if you're trying to run away with your ultimate, you can turn around and boomerang someone, hit them, and gain some extra movement speed as well. But she has short range. However, her wave clear is tremendous. So the Q does pretty decent damage early on too. They did buff it. They hot nerfed it because it was doing way too much extra damage. But you can throw this down a line. Does 15% reduced damage, so it doesn't do just an obscene amount of damage, but it does add up really quickly to wave clear. And it doesn't cost it. The Q costs like a decent amount of mana. It's not a ridiculous amount, but it's okay. So it's excellent wave clear, and it's also pretty good poke. If you happen to hit somebody with both of these, it's got some nice range on it. Does quite a bit of damage. So excellent in team fights just to throw out and hit a bunch of people with area of effect damage too. So pretty good. And then you have your Ricochet, and this is kind of her signature move, and this is what they changed about her, I think, last season to make her good again. When did they change that Ricochet can crit? It may have been longer back than that. Let me see. Okay, so they increased the base damage and then nerfed it like 1 day later. Okay, this is where they nerfed her last season because she was too strong. They nerfed her here, and I think they nerfed her here. Oh, this is what made her really good. Okay, so starting in Season 6. This is what started the Sivir meta. So her W Ricochet can critically strike on the bounces, which is tremendous. And that's why they had to nerf her, like half a season later. Less attack speed, and the base damage was lowered. But she is very, very good with the itemization and the crit builds because her W can crit. So that's the big ticket. And this is very significant for several reasons. So each bounce does, a certain percentage of your total AD, not bonus, but total AD. So if you have 200 damage, the bounces are going to do 140. That doesn't have diminishing returns. Okay? So think about that. No diminishing returns. So this has diminishing returns where you're only doing 40% on the last target that you hit. This, you do the full 70%. For everybody, and this can critically strike. This can't critically strike. So if you throw this on a minion wave, if it crits every single person down the line. It also resets your auto attack. So you can auto, then ricochet, and get a free auto attack in there, which is meaningful. But this means that you clear waves extremely quickly, and not only do you clear waves, but if someone's standing close to where you're clearing that wave, then they all get hit by this. So you can get chunked down to half health just standing too close to a wave when Sivir starts throwing these ricochets. So it just makes it almost impossible to siege her because she's just going to sit there and keep ricocheting, and you can't even stand close enough to the wave to auto attack her or to do some kind of ability to her because you're going to catch those ricochets. It's going to bounce off the wave and hit you. So you have to stand like, 1,000 away or really far off to the side, or you're going to risk getting hit by these ricochets. So, very, very powerful. Bounce to nearby affected. Total bounce damage, 210. Why does it say 210%? Bounce to nearby affected targets. It's unlimited amount of targets. Oh, next 3 basic attacks. Okay. So your next 3 attacks can do 70% bounce damage per person hit. So in a team fight, what makes her really strong is people will be clumped up. You just auto attack the tank with this ricochet. So it does full damage to the tank, and then once it starts ricocheting, it does the 70% to everybody else. And if that critically strikes, with an infinity edge, then all of a sudden it's doing an extra 70%, and then 50% of that. So that's 35. So all of a sudden you're doing 105 plus 70, 175% of your AD to everybody in that fight. So you can auto attack the tank and still have it bounce and hit everybody else in the fight potentially for that 175% extra damage. So that's the whole thing with Sivir. She just melts an entire team by only hitting the tank. So she doesn't have to miss position. She can just kite the tank as long as he's close to other people and do a ton of extra damage. So that's what makes Sivir very, very powerful in team fights, is that she just crits and can hit everybody with the ricochet. So you don't have to try to go for the squishy targets. You're just naturally going to incidentally hit them just by auto-attacking the tank a lot of times. She blocks the next enemy ability used with Spell Shield. So this is really powerful if you use it correctly. It's great against Caitlyn because you can just eat her traps in lane and get a bunch of extra mana. But this is good in just a ton of different situations. You know, if Nautilus is trying to ult you, if Vi's trying to ult you, if there are just a ton of champions, if Maokai's trying to run at you with Righteous Glory and W onto you, you can spell shield it so you don't get binded. If Cho'Gath is trying to like flash ult you, that's the dream. If you can spell shield Cho'Gath ult, that's hilarious. But there are just a lot of really, really good uses for the spell shield. Makes it very difficult to harass her in lane too, because if you try to harass her, you just know you're going to give her a bunch of extra mana half the time, and that extra mana is going to turn into more ricochets and more boomerang blades, and she's going to keep pushing you into tower. So it makes it very difficult to try to lock her down in lane, and very frustrating a lot of times, because you know you're just going to be giving her a lot of mana, because it doesn't cost any mana to use this. So, you know, that makes it very hard to lane against her. And then finally, this is her other signature thing, is her ultimate. So it gives everybody bonus movement speed of 40% for 2 seconds, and then starts decaying after that. After a few seconds. So they have nerfed the speed on this over time. But it's really, really fast. Even 20% extra movement speed is really fast. And she gets extra attack speed while Ricochet is active. So once again, this is an attack speed modifier, and we just talked about that with Tristana. So whenever you're ricocheting, you get up to 60% bonus attack speed. So very powerful with the Energizer build. And then this helps her engage. She doesn't just get the speed, everyone on the team. So you can run all of your tanks. You can run Maokai and Cho'Gath in there with this, with Righteous Glory. You can run Rakan in there. You can run away from stuff. So she's one of the few people who can actually split a side lane if you need to. Be careful, check with your team, make sure they're not going to get caught. But if you need to run a side lane, you can actually push a side lane, because you can escape and not get caught. No other AD carry can really push side waves like she can without risking getting caught. But between Spell Shield and her ultimate, it's so difficult to catch her out. So that gives her a ton of utility. You can start fights, you can get away from fights. It frees you up if you want to be able to push side lanes. She can do it very quickly. It just makes her very powerful. She has the attack speed steroid. She scales very well with critical strike. She's great with Energizer. Very good. So she's not going to have as much top-end damage, and she's not going to have as much siege potential as Tristana, because she's only 500 range instead of Tristana's 650 late game, 650 plus. But it does give her a lot of utility for her team, and she has really good scaling, especially in team fights. So just very, very versatile. You can pick her into almost anything and be relevant in a lot of games. So that's why I gave her the number 2 slot. Now, Draven is somebody who, if you're a very good Draven player, could be number 1, potentially. He is extremely powerful. If everybody knows that who's watching this video, probably. Draven can take over games, although you might not quite understand why if you've never played him. He just seems to do just an obscene amount of damage and just 1 or 2 shot people. So Draven is probably the best champion to one trick, although they are nerfing him in the next patch, I believe. But he's very, very powerful. And the reason is, there's a couple of key reasons. The number 1 reason that he's powerful is because of his Q. This basically, once you get this to level 9, it gives you 105 bonus AD. So it gives you flat physical damage, which this helps you last hit so much. Even level 1, just starting the game off with 30 extra physical damage that also scales with your bonus physical damage. So you're going to get an extra 65% of that. So that's pretty much going to give you, I forgot to do that in my past Draven calculations, where the bonus stacks with itself. So you get an extra 15 physical damage there. So you get 45 extra damage level 1. So you're hitting people for like 100. So that makes it really hard. It's basically like you're starting off with a free BF sword in lane. Think about that. A free BF sword at level 1. Draven just walks into lane with 1300 gold. That's what this Q does when you're juggling these Qs. Which is pretty insane to think about. That he basically gets spotted, you know, 1300 gold or 1400 gold or however much BF sword is these days. Yeah, 1400 gold for 40 attack damage. So Draven gets to start off with 45. So he gets more than a BF sword. He basically just gets handed 1500 gold to start the game. Like, oh, here you go, Draven. Here's 1500 gold just to start the game. Have fun. Have fun, enemies. So that's why Draven is so ridiculously strong. Because at level 1, and this costs 45 to start a spinning axe. If you catch it, it's not going to cost any more. So if you keep catching axes, then you get a free BF sword. It's even more than 45. It's probably like 47. And I think an attack damage, how much is that actually? Attack damage is worth about 35 apiece, I believe. Well, first off, let's do this math. Okay, so it's 49. Basically 50 attack damage. You start off with 1750 gold. 1,750 gold. So it's basically like you're almost starting off with 6 kills. Think about that. It's like Draven starts off the game, when the game starts, 6-0. Just imagine that it says that. Pentakill +1 for Draven at 1 second into a game. Like, that's ridiculous. That's so ridiculous. So anyways, that's why Draven's powerful. And this doesn't even include when you start with 15 AD plus your Doran's Blade. So that's an extra 25 AD times 65. Let's figure all this out here. So you're going to have 15 AD from your runes. Then you go with the extra 10 off of Doran's Shield. You might even get a couple from your masteries. I'm trying to think of masteries. There's a couple that probably give you a little bit of rinky-dink AD. We'll just say 25 to start with. Gets an extra 16 AD off of that. So that's 66 bonus AD. 2,300 gold. 2,300 gold. It's 7.7. It's almost 8 kills worth of gold. That's a pentakill plus a triple. Just it reads when you start the game, Draven, pentakill, triple kill. Like that's what the sound effect should be when Draven enters a game. So that is extremely unfair, and that's how it should feel. So this is why his early game is just so insane, because it's almost impossible to miss last hits. And when he auto attacks you, it just feels like it chunks a ton of your health, because it does. Because he's getting spotted like almost like a BF sword and change, right? Like a BF sword and 2 long swords or something. He's getting spotted like whatever that number was in gold. You know, 2,300 gold. So he's getting like a BF sword and a little more than a half. It's like a BF sword, 3 long swords or something like that. It's ridiculous. So that's what you need to understand about Draven. That's why he's so ridiculously strong, is because he starts off with just an absurd amount of extra AD from the beginning. I think this scales with itself because it gives you this bonus AD plus this. If it doesn't scale, because it gives you the bonus plus this. It may not scale with itself. Even if it doesn't scale with itself, it's going to be a little bit less crazy. So it's still going to be 1 BF if it doesn't scale with itself. Either way, it's a ton. Okay, it's somewhere between pentakill and pentakill plus 2 or something like that. So it's a ton of extra damage. early on. I guess it wouldn't scale with itself. It's just weird how it's worded. Because it says it gives you this, and then plus your bonus AD. So you gotta wonder, like, does it scale with itself? Let me see that real quick. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. Like, what matters is that it's a ton of damage. So that's what defines Draven. That's what makes him really strong early on. Okay, and so this means he can outtrade anyone early on. If he's just auto-attacking people early, he's going to win most of the time. So this is why Draven is the premier bully right now. There really aren't other bullies early game that can do it like Draven. Because he does so much damage that he can carve right through a Doran's shield, right through Warlord's Bloodlust, and that Janna sitting there, if he has enough time to sit there and land a few auto attacks. So the kind of damage that he deals on just his auto attacks is the kind of damage that someone else would deal by hitting, you know, a level 3 ability or something on somebody. It's just an insane amount of damage. So that first and foremost is what makes Draven really powerful. Okay? Now pair that with his W. Where he gains extra attack speed and movement speed. For 3 seconds. And this resets if he catches the spinning axe. So it basically has no cooldown. So he can keep this up almost permanently. So he gains, you know, at least 40 movement speed. This is what you'll max second. But he gains at least 40 movement speed. And 20% attack speed, so it scales even harder. So he gets a ton of benefit out of AD. So not only does he start off with a free BF sword, but it scales really, really hard as the game progresses. And guess what? This crits. So unlike a lot of other abilities out there, you know, like a Draven Arrow or a Sivir Boomerang or a Caitlyn Q or whatever, this actually crits. So it hits like an ability that, you know, when you have 200 AD, 100 of it maybe is bonus AD in the early game, you know, it's going to hit for 150, just like an ability would, but it can actually crit, and it scales with Infinity Edge. So this means that his auto attacks will start hitting, you know, in the early to mid game. I've done the math in past videos. Early to mid game, you know, his auto attacks are going to start critting for like 700 or something, and this is why he can literally feel like he 2 or 3 shots you, because he does as soon as he gets Infinity Edge. Sadie? With no cooldown. That's just autos. Like, it's not like he has an ability that can, you know, hit you and he can use it every 15 seconds. It's really dangerous. It might kill you, like a Blitzcrank hook or something. This is just straight up, he does auto attacks and murders you. So he has great steroid here. He has great movement speed. He has an excellent, just unbelievable steroid on his Q. He has another safety feature that can knock people aside when they're trying to jump on him. So he can do this to Zac. He can do this to Cho'Gath running at him. So he has a decent solution. This can be harder to hit. But basically, he can kite around tanks a little bit with this. He can stand aside, knock them away with this. And his Whirling Death scales really well with your bonus AD too. And this is a good sort of execute ability. So Draven is massively powerful. Oh, and by the way, whenever he kills people, he gets showered with extra gold. So he gets a ton of extra gold, and he's one of the highest scaling damage AD carries in the game because of the way that his Q and his Blood Rush interact, especially with Critical Strike. So he's excellent with the Energizer build. And he's pretty good against tanks. Now, his escapes are not as good as someone like a Tristana or even as a Sivir, because, you know, if Malachi W's, Malachi's going to get on him, and Malachi's probably going to stick on him when he gets there, and he's going to have a hard time cutting through, you know, 200 armor Malachi. But especially against squishies, he just absolutely 1 or 2 shots people, and if you get any kind of peel whatsoever, then he can just completely run over an enemy team very easily. So he does have some self-peel. It's just not as good as Sivir or Tristana. But the damage is Definitely higher than Sivir's, and probably higher than Tristana's for a lot of the game, especially the burst damage. Tristana might do higher sustained damage. I don't know. I think Draven's the highest sustained damage in the game. But his wave clear is not that good. He doesn't siege towers very well. He doesn't offer any kind of team utility like Tristana, like Sivir. And he just doesn't peel as well. So he's raw damage. He's super powerful. But he can be shut down if they have a coordinated team that can get to him. And he has a little bit of a harder time closing out games in terms of objectives. But other than that, he's super strong. So like I said, he's anywhere from 1 to 3 probably on this patch in terms of overall ranking because just his raw damage, his raw power, and his snowballing capacity with his adoration stacks and extra gold that he gets. So Draven is very, very powerful in solo queue right now. There are plenty of people that have gotten very high ranks just by running Draven. But once you start getting up, you know, past platinum into diamond, people can punish him because they know where his axes are going to land, and they'll hit that with skill shots or at least poke him a little bit whenever he tries to catch axes. So he has to catch these axes to get this bonus. So it's not entirely free. People in lower elo will allow it to be free because they won't pressure him for those axes, but as you move up, it gets a little bit harder. But anything platinum and lower, he's just phenomenal if you get good with him. He's probably the hardest AD carry to play too because you have to constantly grab those axes while you're last hitting, while you're paying attention to your mini-map, while you're paying attention to your positioning. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to juggle, especially when the enemy starts trying to contest your position. So when they start to punish you for catching those axes, it gets really tough. Okay, Kalista. We'll move a little bit faster here. Dang it, it is going to be like an hour 30 probably. Kalista's really strong, and she's kind of an odd duck here because she doesn't use the Energizer build. She doesn't use the critical strike. What she does do is she kites extremely well, and she has very high burst damage. So that's key because it catches people off guard a lot of times, and it's really hard to shield or prevent it because it's such high damage that like a Janna shield won't be able to shield it. She's just going to burst through the Janna shield, and it's really difficult to predict when she's going to rend. And so it allows her to play around champions like Janna because she can just keep sticking people with the spears, and then unless you have lightning reflexes or unless the Kalista messes up, you're not going to be able to shield a lot of that rend damage because if you throw a shield on somebody, Kalista can just wait until the shield falls off, and then she can rend and just execute people. So she can drop the shield off either with her auto attacks or just by chilling and focusing another target, and then just rend to blow people up. So that makes it particularly hard to play against her. Especially for healing champions because they can't even prevent, like your AD carry is just going to be sitting there like at 75% health, and then they're just going to get executed by rend, you know, once she gets 5 or 6 stacks in there. And you can't really heal through that very well because it's heavy burst damage. So she's deceptively damaging because it takes her time to stick those in there, so she's not going to be able to burst people out like other champions that just land a couple of crits like Draven and just kill people. But she does back-end burst damage, and she cuts through tanks pretty easily because once they get so many rends stuck in them, once again, she's going to do such an overload of burst damage that they're not going to see it coming, they're not going to heal through it. It just makes it very difficult to use your defensive steroids to prevent a lot of that damage, right, Sadie? So she makes it difficult for people like that. Also, she has basically infinite kiting capacity and chasing capacity because, as you can see in the video there, when she attacks people, she can move every time she attacks to reposition. And so if you're a very good Kalista, then you can constantly reposition, just like she's doing to Irelia here. And it makes it very difficult for people to stick onto you. And you're not getting away from a fight with her either because she can run you down with that. So it just makes it very tough to decide what you want to do against her. She creates a lot of matchup problems because not only is her damage unexpected when she rends and it just like, boom, does a zillion damage, but also you're not quite sure if you should chase her or not, or if you should run away or not, because she's going to be able to kite you, and it's hard to predict, well, how many more Rens is she going to get in me if I try to chase her before my cooldown, you know, if I'm Maokai, before my W comes off cooldown, and then I try to, you know, stick back on her, do I have enough to do it? And it's very difficult for people to play against that because they just don't know. Right? They just don't know if they should chase you. They don't know if they should run away because they're thinking, okay, well, if I try to run away from this, is she going to be able to stick to me and rend me before my escape comes up? So it just creates a lot of weird scenarios where you're not sure whether or not you should chase her or whether or not you should try to run, because she can be good in both of those situations, and you're not really sure just how much damage she's going to do, or when you should shield or when you should use your defensive steroid because you don't know if she's going to do it. On a similar note, she's very good at taking objectives, particularly Baron, because once she gets so many Rend stacks in there, I believe she can Rend and do more than a smite. Now, I'm not sure exactly how many Rend stacks you have to have in there. It's very difficult to calculate the Rend, too. So each additional spear does, you know, up to 32 plus 30% of your AD, with no diminishing returns. And so if you have, I believe it does not have any diminishing returns. So if you have, you know, 5 spears stuck in somebody, that's going to be 150% of your AD plus 135. So if you have 200 AD, you know, that's going to do 350 plus 150. That's going to be 500 stacks, or 500 damage off of that. So if you have 10 stacks, it's going to do an extra 1,000 damage on that. In addition to her first stack, you know, does a decent amount here. And it can stack up to 254 times. There's no limit to the amount of stacks. So, you know, if she's sitting there with like 20 stacks in there, she can rend the thing for, you know, like 1,000 damage. It doesn't say there's any maximum amount of damage either to minions and monsters. So it's infinite. You know, if she gets to sit there and just attack a Baron for 30 seconds, you know, there's a high probability she could have, who knows, 40 stacks in there, and then rend it. So it makes it really hard to smite against her or to Cho'Gath Chomp against her. So she has great control over Dragon, over Baron for those reasons. Obviously, she can't rend towers, so she doesn't take towers nearly as fast as something like a Tristana, and she only has 550 range. So she's a little bit better at sieging than someone like Sivir, in terms of ability to attack a tower, but she's not as strong as someone like Tristana. So like I said, she's a bit of an odd duck because she has fairly unpredictable damage. And she can play around, if she's very smart, she can play around mitigation like a Janna shield. She's going to know when she should chase, when she should run. So she's pretty hard to play correctly, but if you practice her, then she can just do a ton of damage. And her scaling is just bizarre because she only does 90% of her total AD on physical attacks. And every time she attacks, she gets to lunge a little bit, and her basic attack wind up. And while dashing, her basic attack wind up is only reduced by 0.66 per 1% attack speed compared to the standard 1-to-1. So attack speed is really good on her, but it does get reduced by a certain amount. So that's kind of her whole kit, is she wants to stack, like to stick you with spears and then rend you out at the end. So this means that Blade of the Ruined King and Hurricane are actually very good on her because Hurricane procs rend sticks. So that means that if you're in a team fight, you can simultaneously stick rends into 3 different people at the same time. So even though Hurricane's been nerfed, even though Bork has been nerfed, that is an extremely powerful interaction. And that's why she's particularly powerful right now, is because of the way that Hurricane interacts with Rend. And she came out of nowhere. If you're wondering, well, why did she all of a sudden become popular again? It's because she's so good against tanks, because she does such high burst damage to them at the end, and because she can kite them so well. And people aren't going to be able to burst her out as easily as they have been in the past, because fights are going on longer because you have enchanter support. So when you have, you know, a Janna or a Sona or a Taric or, you know, people like that that are drawing out these fights because they're healing and shielding everybody for absurd amounts, then she gets to sit there and stack more and more and more spears for massive rends. So she wants fights to last longer. Kalista's not good in a meta where people get blown up in like 2 auto attacks, or when someone just gets instantly blown up by a Zed. She's good in a meta where you're sitting there and each side is beating on a tank for, 15 seconds before somebody dies. So that's why she all of a sudden came out of left field for a lot of people, is because fights are lasting longer, games are lasting longer, and that means that Kalista's going to be really good because her rend is going to start really kicking in when she gets Hurricane and Blade the Ruined King. 2-item power spike, massive damage. So that's what makes her particularly strong in this meta. Those 2 things. And then also her Fate's Call is a really good engage tool. So a lot of times, especially in a tank meta, so a lot of times AD carries don't have good engage tools. Some of them do, like Ashe and Varus, but Ashe and Varus are both relatively weak right now because they don't use Blade the Ruined King nearly as well as Kalista does, and they don't do a lot of sustained damage compared to other AD carries, but she does very high sustained damage, and she has an engage tool where you can throw your tank support or your Rakan or Morgana or whomever into the enemy to start a fight. Alistar. So Alistar and Rakan are probably the best 2, but there are a lot of good choices. Very low cooldown, only 120 seconds, very cheap. It's a really long throw, and you can just save your support too, so it makes it really hard to gank and kill a support. Because let's say that your Alistar is trying to go ward the tri-bush, and then boom, there's the jungler, and the jungler jumps out with, the mid laner. They try to kill you, just face call, pull him back in, boom, he's safe. So it creates like almost like a Tom Kench-esque type of effect from like 1200 range, where it's just virtually impossible to kill the support. It's almost impossible to pick the support off. And you can simultaneously use it as an engage tool. So that's very powerful. It has a lot of utility. It saves your support. If you're afraid your support might be a turkey and they're always going to get caught, you can save them, or you can start fights. So she just has a ton of utility. She takes Barons very quickly. She's excellent in team fights. She's got a great 2-item power spike. She's excellent with Ardent Censer because each bolt of Hurricane also procs Ardent Censer. So, if each attack with Ardent Censer heals for 30 on hit, all of a sudden she's healing for 90 on hit. In addition to Void of the Ruined King also procs on Hurricane bolts. So she's going to be healing for all of those Void of the Ruined King lifesteal, for the 12% lifesteal. So she's just going to be healing for like a truckload, especially when she clears minion waves, which once again, she has great wave clear. Because you can just attack, stick, 4 spears in a minion wave, and each minion rend, and then boom, there's the wave. So it's not quite as fast as something like a Sivir, but it's very, very fast wave clear that also heals you for an absurd amount. So just her kit and its synergy with Rend, Hurricane, Blade the Ruined King, and Ardent Censer are all very, very strong. So this is what makes Rakan particularly good with her, is because he can run Ardent Censer, and he's great to throw into a fight. Okay, so that's Kalista. She's pretty hard to play, has a ton of utility, excellent in long fights, excellent wave clear, excellent Baron control, great initiation. She's just fantastic. She could, once again, if you're a really good Kalista player, especially in the right composition, she could be the best AD carry on this patch right now. Thanks for the sub. I appreciate it. Thank you, Zach. Okay, so any of these, depending on the composition and what's going on, I still think Tristana is number 1 just because she's so foolproof. Sivir's really good and kind of relatively foolproof too. Like, Sivir's going to be able to do her thing in most games. She doesn't require a ton of skill. However, Draven and Kalista are harder to play, but if you do play them correctly, they could potentially be better than Sivir and maybe even Tristana in the right circumstances if they start snowballing. So they're both excellent, excellent top tier. These 4 are a step above everything else on this list by quite a large margin, I think. Okay, let's go into the last ones here, just the next 4, and that's it. Jesus, it's always a long video with me, man. I can't. I just have so much to say. I have so much to analyze. Just so much to try to teach people about. And I get so excited talking about it too, because I think about these combinations and, I figure out stuff that maybe I hadn't thought about before as well as I'm talking. Okay, so Caitlyn, I talked about Caitlyn up above. I'm not going to go too much into her. Everyone kind of knows how Caitlyn works. The big thing that you need to understand about Caitlyn is it's all about the traps. I see so many Caitlyn's, even in Platinum, that do not utilize her traps correctly. Caitlyn is all about the traps. If you can't use these traps, don't play Caitlyn. She's not a top tier auto attacking AD carry, okay? Because she doesn't have any steroids. She doesn't have anything that gives her extra AD. She doesn't have anything that gives her extra attack speed. She doesn't have any kind of interactions that work really well with attack speed or like Kalista. So she doesn't get like Wrens that scale extremely well with attack speed. She doesn't get a Tristana Q, gives her all this extra attack speed, or a Sivir, Ricochet, whatever. Sivir's ult that gives Ricochet extra. She doesn't have ricochets. She doesn't have all this stuff that Draven and the top 4 have, okay? They're going to outgun her. And it's just a straight gunfight. Everybody pops their abilities and just starts firing. She's going to lose, okay? So what her strength is she has very high zone control and burst damage. That is what Caitlyn does, okay? So this, first of all, is her headshot mechanic. It has 1300 range and deals 50% plus your critical strike chance percentage and your critical strike modifier. So you're going to get to 2.5. 0.5 times 2.5 times your critical strike chance. So if you have a 50% critical strike chance, you have a 2.5 modifier. That's going to be a 1.75 times 50. I'm not going to do all the math right now. It's a lot of damage, okay? Because we're running out of time here. A lot of damage that scales very well with critical strike. So that's what she's all about, are these headshots. Now, every time you get... if she's sitting in brush, she does get 15% extra attack speed, and they generate a stack of headshot. Basic attack, the same bonus physical. Granting our next basic attack the same bonus physical damage at 6 stacks, though this does not benefit from bonus range, nor is it consumed by other instances of headshot. Okay. Okay, so she gets a little bit of attack speed, and she has the headshot mechanic. That's the thing, but it's nowhere near the kind of attack speed that, like I said, Tristana or Draven. It's not nearly as much. So what this means is you need to be able to trigger headshots. How do you trigger headshots? Well, if you land attacks on people, especially from brush, you get that. So that's good. So she does have, some scaling. So the attack speed does work with her. She has a really low base attack speed, though, compared to a lot of champions. It's a 0.54. Is disgustingly low attack speed. So 0.54, that means every second she's only attacking 0.54 times. So it's like, it's going to take a long time for her to attack. She has a very slow windup. Whereas if you look at someone like Draven, for example, I don't even know what Draven's is, so let's just discover it together here really quickly. He probably has about an average. Yeah, a 0.67. So she basically has 20% less attack speed on the base. And remember, the base is important because that determines what, when you get like a Phantom Dancer or something, you get the, 30% extra attack speed. That is based on your base attack speed. It's 30% of your base. So if your base is really low, like Caitlyn, that means your attack speed scaling is not going to be nearly as large. So she doesn't scale as well off the Energizer build as some of these other champions. So you have to land these headshots. You have to be able to get the headshot. So just auto-attacking and getting them every now and then is not enough. It's all about the trap. So you can have a maximum of 5 traps. And whenever they land on the trap, they get a headshot plus this extra Yordle damage. So up to 190 plus 60% of your AD. All of this can crit. Right, so you get this standard headshot here for a lot of extra damage, and this, and just your normal AD. So this is how she gets crits of like 1400 damage late game when she gets Infinity Edge, Rapid Fire Cannon, Static Shiv. All of that can crit. So when you get hit by a Rapid Fire proc that can also go on headshot, so you get Rapid Fire proc plus Static Shiv, all of that crits in addition to stacking with the headshot damage with the Yordle snap trap damage. This is how she hits people for just an obscene amount and almost one-shots people late game. But that has to actually happen. And I talked about earlier how people don't use her correctly in Platinum, which is when someone steps on a trap, you can actually get 2 headshots on them. So you get 1 normal headshot, so just boom, they step on the trap, headshot. Net backwards, hit them with your net. Q them while you're flying backwards. You can start the Q animation while you're going backwards, hit them with a Q, a lot of extra damage, and then headshot them after that. So you get 2 headshots. You get a snap trap headshot, you get a net hit, you get a Q, and another headshot. And if you do this in lane, it'll knock some like 70% off of somebody's health. Sometimes if you have a BF sword and against a squishy target like a Sona, you just flat out kill them with 1 combo. So that's what she is. She's like a burst AD caster, if you want to think of that. So she can auto attack and do okay, but that's really not her expertise, is to sit there and just trade shots over and over and over again. She's wants to poke from range where there's 650 range, and she wants to make people try to get to her through these traps, and then she wants to blow them up when they touch the traps. That's what she's all about. So that makes her strong in organized play where people know how to do these traps, and she's very good at objective control because she can just drop these traps on a ramp where people are trying to come in and contest Baron, or they're trying to come in and contest Dragon. You just drop all these traps on the ramp. No one can walk through that because you're going to blow them up. Or even more insidious is when someone's trying to siege a tower, a base tower, and she just drops these 5 traps there. Siege is over. You're not getting through it, right? So either you can't come out and contest her while she's sieging you, or if you're trying to siege her, it's impossible to go in and touch that tower most of the time because she's going to kill you unless your team is really, really far ahead. So she's great at tower defense. She's great at tower offense. She has very great lane pressure early on. She can poke, she can harass, she can wave clear. She has excellent burst damage with her traps. She's relatively safe because if you play around your traps in lane, it makes it really hard to dive on top of you. Like a Leona can't engage on you through a trap. A Rakan can't dive through a trap on top of you because they're going to get trapped mid-flight. And she can net backwards and get away from people. So she has pretty good escapes, pretty good wave clear, good siege. It's just very skill oriented, and you have to get ahead early because you're going to get outscaled later by most of the other top 4 champions. So that's the whole thing. That's why she's been like the #1 pick ban champion in solo or in professional play for like the last 3 patches, and she's starting to fall down just a little bit because they're buffing other champions and they're nerfing her to some extent, and sort of the meta's changing around. She's not as good against tanks. She's okay, but you can't really burst out a Malachi that has like 300 armor. You know, it's going to take a long time to chip through him. So she's okay versus tanks, but she's not going to be as good as Tristana, Kalista, Sivir, and Draven at cutting through tanks. She just doesn't have the damage for it because she doesn't have as many modifiers. She's really all about sieging and burst damage. So she's not the worst against tanks, but she's certainly not the best either. So that's why she's good. At Diamond Plus, she's probably up here in the tier 1. But at Platinum and lower, when people aren't going to leverage her early game, when people aren't going to use the traps correctly or at an optimal level, then she's not going to be as good. Okay, Xayah is another one who has the potential to be really powerful. I think that with Rakan, if you have a good Rakan on your team with a Xayah, I think that she has the potential to be up in the tier 1 list. So she has a lot of steroids in her kit. This is another instance, kind of like Kalista, where the longer the fight goes on, it's better for her because she's going to be able to drop more feathers. And the more you can attack, the more feathers you're going to get on the ground, right? So whenever you cast an ability, your next 3 basic attacks penetrate all enemies in their path, doing 100% to her main target and 50% pass through. All of those can crit. Okay? So this is great wave clear, and it's excellent team fight damage. So you're just throwing this, you're hitting the main target. It's like a little mini Twitch ult. You're throwing it, you're hitting the main target, you're doing a ton of damage, and it's leaving a feather. So if you cast 2 abilities quickly, you can store up to 5. So you can cast your Q, auto attack, and then use your W, and then you have 5 auto attacks ready to go. So that's really how you want to do it. Q, auto, W, and then just go to town. And you're going to get 6 feathers on there total. So it just does a ton of damage, lots of pass-through damage. This is okay. This actually, so this will drop 2 feathers, and then you're going to get 6 auto attacks are going to drop more feathers. So you're going to have a total of 8 feathers when you do that. And I talked about this when Xayah got released. I talked about how I thought she was going to be an extremely powerful AD carry when most people were saying she was going to be garbage. I was like, no, she's going to be really, really good. And she has been good. They nerfed her a little bit, but she's still really good. So you can do the math here. I'm here to tell you if there's 8 feathers on the ground and it's late game, this scales with critical strike. It has very low drop off because it's 10% less than the last, not less than the maximum feather. So that's really important to keep in mind. I do the math in the video whenever she was released earlier this year. Go check it out. I'll put a link in the final version in the Google Doc. But a ton of damage with all those feathers down. And it can hit everybody. Everybody in the team fight. So not only does she hit everybody on the way out with clean cuts, doing a lot of damage. And by the way, she has bonus attack speed here of 20. And her basic attacks do 20% bonus physical damage and give her 30% movement speed for 4 seconds because they refresh every time she hits. And Rakan does extra damage. So 20% extra damage. It's nasty. It's a nasty amount of teamfight damage that goes out, and then when she does this, it just bursts everybody. So it's kind of like a cross between Twitch on the way out, doing burst damage, and then Kalista on the way back in, where it just catches everyone off guard, and they're like, oh my god, that just did 1,500 damage to me, or something like that. And it can hit everyone on the team. So she is kind of a cross between Twitch and Kalista in that respect. So it's just a ton of team fight damage, scales extremely well with crit, and the Energizer build. Very, very good with Rakan because you get the extra damage and he can protect her. He's great with Ardent Sensor. It's really good. So she's not great at chasing people down, like Kalista has the potential to chase, but she's excellent if people are trying to run at you, like tanks. She's excellent at that. And she has this sort of get out of jail free card where if anyone tries to go after her, then she can Feather Storm. And it makes her invulnerable. She jumps in the air and she throws 5 feathers down. So in theory, you could have 13 feathers in a team fight in like an ideal situation that is talked about. How you could get 8 right here, and then another 5 here for 13, doing a bonus zillion damage. So it's a lot of damage. That's all you need to know. It is a ton of damage. She's relatively safe with Featherstorm. She doesn't have a lot of dashes, although she does get a lot of extra movement speed. 30% movement speed that stays up. So she's really, really good, particularly with Rakan. She's a little bit lower than some of these other champions because she's not quite as... Her only safety is this, so she does have movement speed, she does have Featherstorm, but it's not as good as the Sivir ult, it's not as good as Tristana's jumps and range and all of that. She requires a little bit of setup time. She doesn't quite have as much utility as Kalista does. Like, she can't secure Barons and Dragons as fast as Kalista. She can't start fights as well as Kalista can. I don't know. She still is really, really good. So, she's up there. She's tier 2. If you're with Rakan and you're a really good Xayah player, she could be as high as tier 1. She's quite strong. I'd play with Xayah. If you see CleanX on my stream, it's the name of another streamer. When I play with him, a lot of times I'll play Rakan and Xayah, or he'll play Xayah, I'll play Rakan, and you can just see how powerful it is. It's a very, very powerful combination. You even see some pro play. Okay, Twitch is another one who's perennially very powerful if you're good with him in solo queue. Very snowbally. And the problem with Twitch, he is good with Infinity Edge. So let's pull up Twitch here really quick, and we're just about done. We're just going to do Twitch and whoever... Vayne as the last couple ones here. So if you look at Twitch, Twitch has a lot of scaling. First of all, he wants to stack up his Venom. So this is sort of similar to a Kalista Rend mechanic. So once again, the longer the fight goes on, the better it's going to be for Twitch. He stacks this up. Then instead of Rend, he has something called Contaminate, which does an extra up to 150% of your bonus AD in addition to 290, and it can hit multiple targets. Okay? So, it's a mechanic similar to Kalista. It does a little bit of upfront damage. It does damage ticks over time, and then you can basically rend them with Contaminate to do a ton of damage. He has kind of a dinky little slow here, so this is kind of a relatively worthless ability. It does put 2 stacks on him and slow him, so it does have a little bit of utility. It's not amazing. But what makes him unique compared to other supports is he can stealth. So he can sneak up on people, and he opens up with a ton of extra damage, 50% bonus attack speed. And if he actually kills somebody, then it gets reset if they die while it's afflicted. So he doesn't even have to get the last hit. If anyone gets the last hit, he can go invisible again, reposition, open up. So this makes him very, very good if you know how to position well and if you want to roam with him. So this is great for solo queue because no one respects the invisible Twitch, right? If you get 3 kills bottom lane, you can just roam middle, get a kill, and it gets the enemy team raging at each other too because they're like, oh my god, why didn't you call missing bottom? Because I can't see him, right? And he gets around wards too, right? So if he rolls up invisible, he can get around green wards if you go invisible at the right time. And it's really hard. He can just sit there and wait until people, and he can be at the fight invisible and just waiting, and he can wait until the enemy uses their crowd control abilities, right? So he can wait until the Vi uses her ult on your mid mage, or he can wait until Janna's already used her tornado or used her ultimate or whatever. And he just pops up, pops his ult, and just boom, ton of damage. So his ult gives you 40 extra AD, and it lets his attacks, gives it 850 range, longest range in the game. So this is something people mess up with Twitch a lot, I see in Platinum, is people will try to open up almost in melee combat with Twitch. And it's like, he has 850 range. He can hit you from the other side of the universe with these auto attacks, right? So use that range. Like, stay maximum range so people can't hit you. Now, another thing that people mess up with is you got to understand that when he attacks, it does less damage down to 40%. It does apply on-hit effect, so it does apply Blade Ruin King and Hurricane. And enemies can, each one of those can critical strike. Okay? But if you are level 6 and you attack through minions, you're only doing 40% of your AD damage. So you're getting a bonus 20, but if you have 100 AD, that'll give you 120 total AD. You're only doing 40%, which is 48 damage. So instead of doing 100 damage, all of a sudden you're only doing 48 damage. I see this all the time in solo queue where people try to open up at level 6 and fight through a minion wave, and it just looks like they're doing no damage to the AD carry because they aren't. Because they're firing through minions and doing a lot less damage. So keep that in mind if you want to play Twitch, that you need clean vision, clean sight when you're attacking people, or it's going to do a lot less damage. So do not shoot through minions. The big damage drop off if you do that. So yeah, so he has all the components of a champion that can snowball and be very powerful. He has stealth, which is innately powerful in solo queue. He has an attack speed steroid. He has an AD steroid. He has extra steroid and burst damage with his poison mechanic. So he's excellent. The only real problem with Twitch is he doesn't have a lot of early damage and trading. It takes a while to stack up Contaminate, and they have to sit there and just let you auto attack him for poison, which is kind of like Kalista, but the thing is Kalista can reposition and Twitch can't. He just sits there and attacks most of the time. His only escape is his invisibility. And if people are smart and they try to gank you, they'll drop a pink ward on you so they can see you, because they can see you with a pink ward when you're invisible. It's one of the few things in the game that you can still see while invisible with the pink ward, because it's counted as camouflaged instead of invisible. So you can be seen by a control ward. So as you play up in higher elos, people will bring control wards, and if you try to run, they will spot you and kill you. But yeah, so that's what takes him down just a little bit. He's super powerful. He can take over a game, but he has no escape. So you have to position well with your invisibility, and you have to not get bullied out early. So if you pair him with a Janna or a Sona who can heal him through lane, excellent. You pair him with something else where he can get murdered, like you put him with a Xayah or a Vel'Koz, not going to be as excellent a lot of the time. So he's a little bit more dependent on your support. Like you have to have a peeler and someone who can get him through a tough early game most of the time. You'll almost always want to start off with Warlords plus Doran's Shield, and that can get you through some tough lanes. But if you're against something like a Draven, or even like a Caitlyn, it can be really tough. But he does scale very well. You can go for the Energizer, just critical strike into Static Shiv Rapid Fire. It's also viable to go Blade of the Ruined King plus Hurricane. Both of those are good. Blade of the Ruined King does help him out early on. It is kind of justified on Twitch to get that extra lifesteal because you have such a tough early lane. And your ultimate does proc Blade of the Ruined King in addition to Hurricane blocking Blade of the Ruined King. So this gives you a lot of healing in team fights. and you also get to stack up your poison better with Hurricane, and you get to apply all of the Blade the Ruined King to everybody. So he is one of the 2 people, in addition to Kalista, where the Blade Hurricane is still pretty good because of his interaction with the poison and his ult. Because Hurricane's so good on him, and if you're going to go Hurricane, you might as well go Blade the Ruined King, because obviously Hurricane applies the Blade the Ruined King procs. Okay, last champion, and then we're done with this, 30-minute video here. Vayne. Okay, so Vayne is very good at breaking tanks. Everybody knows this, but what people don't realize a lot of times is she's also good at breaking squishy champions right now because her Q can crit. So she's very good with the Energizer build. I still see some champions building Blade the Ruined King on her. That is a mistake because she doesn't use Hurricane, because Hurricane does not proc her Silver Bolts. The only time you should get Blade the Ruined King these days is if your champion can use Hurricane, if they have an extremely compelling reason to use Hurricane, like Twitch Poison, like Kalista Rins. So, Hurricane Bolts also do not proc feathers off of Xayah, if you're wondering that. So, Critical Strike is really good on her because your Q can Critical Strikes. This is a great steroid. This means that whenever you tumble and auto-attack somebody, you're not only doing your normal damage, you're doing 50% extra damage. So if you would attack them for 100, now you attack them for 150. And if you crit, that's 300. And if you have Infinity Edge and you crit, then that's going to be 150, like 375, I think. I have to go back and do the math. I want to finish the video. It's a lot, okay? And it's on a 2-second cooldown if you max your tumble. So not only does it do pretty massive range, but it lets you reposition. So you can get around tanks. So if they're trying to run at you, you can just constantly roll around, reposition, knock people into walls. So you have this to reposition, and you have your Condemn to knock people back to reposition. And you do pretty good true damage, up to 12% of the target's maximum health. So if they have 3,000 health, you're doing 360 damage extra. That, think of true damage as like double damage. So if that was AD damage, that would be 720 damage. That's not mathematically correct at all, but that's just a good way, sort of, just very roughly mentally to think of it. Think of it like double damage. It's a lot of extra damage than just extra AD would afford. Okay, so she does a ton of burst damage off of her tumble. She can reposition. She can proc this very often. She can chase people down. And her ultimate gives her a bunch of extra AD as well. So it gives you up to 70 AD, which scales with your normal auto attack, with your Q bonus AD, and with your critical strike. So when you're proccing this, you're doing that 70 extra damage. You're getting the bonus off of this, and then it's critical striking with an Infinity Edge. You can very quickly get into a situation where these tumbles can crit people for like 1,300 damage. So not quite like Caitlyn-esque damage, but it can get close sometimes depending on your build. And then Final Hour gives you a bunch of extra movement speed, so you can really chase people down, and it gives you invisibility that cannot be seen by a pink ward. So this makes it very difficult to target a smart Vayne and to get her, because a smart Vayne might auto attack you a couple of times, then roll away, and you don't know like where she went. Did she go into a bush? Did she roll around behind you? Is she about to pin you into a wall? Where is she going? So you have to wait, and then she's going to get to auto attack you again before you can target her again. And so that means it's really tough to hit her with skill shots. It's even tough to hit her with point-click abilities sometimes when you're like, you're Malachi and you're trying to W her, and then she just rolls away and she's invisible, and you don't know where to point your W, and then all of a sudden she's on the other side of you and you're getting hit by somebody else. You're just very disoriented and confused. You're like, oh god, where'd she go? And then you try to like W her again, and you manage to W her, but she rolls away before you can hit her with the Q. This makes it very, very difficult and frustrating. It's a good Vayne who's just like rolling circles around you to land skill shots and even point-click ability sometimes, because you get so disoriented in a team fight trying to figure out where she is while everything else is going on. Especially if she starts rolling into bushes or like otherwise out of line of sight. It can be really tough to deal with. So that makes her very good in the right hands. So she has very good top-end damage. She's very good against tanks. She has great mobility. She's probably one of the best champions in the game against tanks, because unlike other champions that are good against the tanks, like Kalista, and to a lesser extent Xayah, a lot of her damage is front-loaded, so she can also burst out squishy champions with the critical build on her. So she's actually decent against assassins like an Echo or a Fizz or something like that because she can dodge a lot of their abilities and she can counter back with really heavy damage very quickly with crits. So she is kind of tough early on. She has virtually no burst damage. She's pretty awful in the laning phase. It can be tough in team fights because you don't have area of effect damage. So in a big team fight, you're not going to do the heavy damage that someone like a Kalista or a Xayah are going to do, right? Because they have a great like area of effect. But she's an excellent duelist. The only person who's probably going to be able to just sit there and go toe-to-toe with her and beat her up is probably Draven. Tristana, if she gets really far ahead, maybe. But it's probably just Draven. But she has more mobility than Draven. So she's a little bit safer than he is. However, so she can have a tough laning phase, but if you get healed through the laning phase, you just get a couple of items, just Static Shiv plus Infinity Edge, and Warlord's Bloodlust. You're off to the races, critting, just blowing people up. She has no wave clear either, which is a big issue, and she's not great at sieging because she only has 550 range with no extra perks, like Caitlyn's traps or like Tristana's range, or Tristana's explosive shot, or explosive bomb. So she can be very good. She's good against tanks. She's a great duelist. She just doesn't have quite as much utility as some of the higher picks. But once again, if you're a very, very good Vayne, you know, she could potentially be up near tier 1 or at least kind of the top of tier 2. So Vayne's very good. I wouldn't pick her into early game bullies. So, you know, I wouldn't pick her into Draven, certainly. And I would think about not picking her into Caitlyn. But she can be a pretty decent pick into something like Twitch, Xayah, maybe even Kalista or Sivir. I think she's pretty good into Sivir. Okay, and then I'm not going to go over the rest of this list. Maybe in future patches when these become a bit stronger, I will. I wanted to go into detail about the top 4, though, because people are always asking me about AD carries, and I just wanted, this is the first one of these that I've done. For AD carry, I always do support ones, so this is a lot of fun, and hopefully this will kind of fill you in. If you play AD carry as an off-roller, if you're a support and you duo with an AD carry, you can point them in this direction. Hopefully they'll learn a little bit about it. If you have something that you want to add in, just let me know in the comments. You know, is there something that I overlooked? Are there really powerful interactions that are out there that I missed or that might be coming up in future patches? Are there really powerful combinations between AD carries and certain supports that you think could be pretty good? Just let me know. Yeah, these other ones can be good. As I said, I'll just real quick. Jinx, very powerful, ton of top end damage, not nearly as safe. So she has virtually no escapes if she doesn't get a kill in a fight. So if she's protected by someone like a Janna, particularly Janna, maybe Tom Kench, then she can keep up with some of these other people in just a straight auto attack fight. She has very powerful interaction between her rockets and then Hurricane and IE. So it's very, very strong when she gets both of those items. But she doesn't have escapes, so you have to keep people off of her. If you can do it, she can take over a whole game by herself. It's just a little bit more contingent on how good the support is, more so than some of these other picks. Misfortune, very good, particular lower elos, great wombo combo. You can go, you know, something like Infinity Edge if you want to, Infinity Edge, Static Shiv, although most people will go Lethality. They'll go Ghostblade, Dustblade. Ghostblade lets you reposition quickly to get into a good spot to fire your ult. The Lethality applies to your entire ult, obviously. Cleaver, really good on her too, so a good build would be like Dustblade, Ghostblade, Cleaver, something like that. You might even skip Duskblade after the nerf and just go like Ghostblade, Cleaver. But yeah, especially if you have an all AD team and you have some way to hold people in place, then being able to do that area of effect shred with the Black Cleaver and just give your team that extra, whatever it is these days, I think 24% damage. They've nerfed it so many times. It's 24% damage, can be very, very strong. So she's really good with something like an Amumu, like a Kennen, like a Rakan, just things that can hold people in place while she ults. So very good, very snowbally, excellent team fighter, but lacks mobility, lacks sustained damage. If everybody spreads out or they survive your ultimate, then she's not going to be as powerful. Kog'Maw, kind of the same deal as Jinx. Very powerful, no escapes. Kind of weird itemization though. Jinx at least uses Critical Strike really well. Critical Strike plus Hurricane is very strong. Kog'Maw gets his power spike earlier. He'll typically get a Ginsu's Rage Blade, I think is the best build. People will build Bork on him too, which I think is pretty nasty. It's just not nearly as good as Ginsu's is. But he can be good in some situations. If you go Ginsu's, I've seen Trinity Force can also be all right on him. Just his problem is, once again, he's very squishy, and I don't think he puts out that much more damage than most of these other top end picks, although he gets his damage earlier, and a lot of his damage is also magic. So if you have a lot of AD on your team, say you have a Fiora top, a Talon mid, and like a Kayn jungle or something, then he is probably the best hybrid AD carry that's going to do a lot of AP that you can get, because his W is mostly magic damage. So he is good in that niche situation where you need an AP damage dealer in the AD slot. So that is something to consider, but he's very dangerous, and I think there are typically better choices most of the time. Jhin is someone who historically has been very good. He does have good utility. You can catch people with his W, with his ult, start fights, but he's been nerfed directly several times. The masteries that were good on him, like Deathfire Touch, have been nerfed for AD carries, and most of his good items have been nerfed. So Duskblade just got nerfed again, and he's terrible against tanks, typically, because he doesn't attack fast enough. He doesn't have any innate tank shred, and he has no mobility. Really, like, he gets some if you critical strike, but low mobility, no innate tank shredding, everything's been nerfed about him, so he's not nearly as good as he used to be, although he's a cool champion. Ziggs is another champion if you need a pure AP carry, so like you have 4 AD on your team or 3 AD plus an enchanter support. Ziggs can be good. He doesn't use Ardent Censer very well. Obviously, he doesn't have critical strike. He's going to have a hard time taking Baron. He does take towers very quickly. He does have great wave clear, and he provides AP damage if you need that in the AD slot. But I would only pick that in extreme situations where you have an all AD team, you need something that's AP, and you don't want to play Kog'Maw. Then you might want to consider going Ziggs. Can be pretty good combo with something like a Xayah, for example. Things that can just lock him down so that you can just blow him up with your bomb and your minefield. So he can be okay. I've seen him be very, very strong before. He was very popular earlier in the season, but he's fallen off a lot since they buffed AD carries. Lucian, pretty bad right now, very short range. Lucian was really popular earlier because of his interaction with Blade of the Ruined King and Black Cleaver. They've nerfed both of those items, so he's very anemic. He does have some mobility, but he just doesn't have the steroids that other people have. He gets a lot of double shots, but he doesn't have extra attack speed. He doesn't have things that give him extra AD. His ult's just going to tickle tanks. So he has the good mobility of something like a Vayne without the teeth to back it up. So he's very heavily reliant on scooting around and just chip damaging people, mostly squishier targets, and he's just not going to be able to do that. He's still a pretty good mid laner because of his early game pressure and ability to snowball in the mid lane, but he's not nearly as good in the bot lane as he used to be. Varus, he's okay, kind of has Jhin-itis. He's very good with Lethality. All of that's been nerfed. He's been directly nerfed. He was a good DFT user, Deathfire Touch. No longer the case. People will still try to build him with Bork Hurricane. I think that's just bad. He just doesn't have enough interactions. He can do some maximum % health with his when he procs his passive, but it's just too slow. It's not enough damage. They're just better choices most of the time. Ashe, similar. She was you're going to see this common theme with everyone in Tier 4. Was a really good Bork Hurricane user for a while. Well, really good's a strong word, but she was a viable Bork Hurricane user. Good in professional play because of the utility of her Hawk Shot and her arrow. Very bad in solo queue. Very squishy, no escapes, really low scaling compared to most other AD carries. Her core items have been nerfed. She can go something like Essence Reaver and then more crit items, but it's just really bad. It's low damage, it's squishy. Just don't do it in solo queue. Ezreal, if you're an Ezreal god, and I know we do have a guy on the channel, Focus Ezreal, who plays with us sometimes, who's very good with Ezreal. If you're an Ezreal god, he's good, but he's not very good against tanks. He doesn't do enough damage, especially in a meta where people can run at you with Righteous Glory. His utility's not going to, or his mobility's not going to save him. He just has a dash backwards. They can run him down and catch him, unlike someone like a Vayne who has a roll and she can knock people back, or someone like a Tristana who has an R, really long range, and a W to get away. He only has that one escape. So it's pretty good as itemization. He just doesn't do as much sustained damage as you need in a tank type of meta. You know, he wants to get Man Immune Triforce, and that's just not strong enough. We'll see next patch. He is getting a buff with more extra AD on his Q. I'm not sure if it'll be enough, but he'll certainly be better than he is now. Corki is another one. Pretty good mid lane, bad in the bottom lane for the same reasons I've described with a lot of other people. or with a lot of other things. He doesn't have attack speed steroids. He doesn't have AD steroids. He's heavily predicated on doing a lot of damage with his magic abilities in lane, which is just not going to work against enchanters, Door and Shield, and Warlord's Bloodlust. So people are just going to heal through your early game harass, and you're just going to get outscaled by anyone who's tier 3 or higher on the list most of the time. He's a good AP champion middle, or he's a good champion middle because he provides AP damage and really high burst with various builds that he can get. But he's not good for that sustained AD damage that you're going to need in the bot lane. Once again, if you have a 3 AD team and you don't want to do Kog'Maw, you don't want to do Ziggs, and you might consider Corki if you just need some AP on your team. So he's okay, but it's like you better have triple AD if you pick him. It just really, really needs some magic damage in that slot. Tier 5 Urgot, I don't know. This stuff's okay. It's okay in some situations, but on-hit Kennen was nerfed really badly. I know that the guy in Europe really loved playing this champion. I'm blanking out on his name right now because I'm trying to finish up the video really quickly. But I know that he was played as AD carry sometimes. Reckless, that's it. In Europe, but he's been nerfed a lot. I forgot what they nerfed his W from total AD to bonus AD, and that just kind of gutted him. So that's not good anymore. Quinn, her range is too low. She doesn't have enough utility. She doesn't have any scaling in terms of attack speed or attack damage. She's just kind of a burst champion. Not good enough. Mordekaiser, if you want someone who does magic, just pick Corki, Ziggs, or Kog'Maw if you need that in the slot. Melee is really, really bad in the AD slot because you're not going to have any tower pressure. And you can get kited very easily by champions like Janna. Teemo, very bizarre tier 5 pick. He does have a blind, which is cute, but he only has 500 range, I believe. And once again, doesn't have attack speed steroid. Well, I guess he does. If he's invisible, he can pop out and has an attack speed steroid, but there's just too much wrong with it. Don't pick Teemo AD carry. And then Urgot is just more of a bruiser. Like he wants to get, I think, Black Cleaver and I don't remember, like maybe Death's Dance or something. He's just not designed to be a good AD carry bottom. He's just going to get crushed by most real AD carries. So that's going to be it. This video is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I hope you learned some stuff out of it, or at least found some intriguing stuff that you can take and tinker with in your own games. Just wanted to give you some of my own thoughts. Like I said, I'm going to try to add in some of these documents later so that you can kind of see in terms of like when a champion's good, when they're bad, like and common build items and things like that. So that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.